patient with a fixed false belief, it's diagnosed as disordered thinking. Examples, I have 3 examples pictured. Most people are familiar with anorexia. Body dysmorphic disorder affects individuals who are convinced that they have scarring, they're disfigured, but they aren't. Individuals with body integrity identity disorder typically believe and strongly feel that they are disabled, but trapped in an abled body. And they will seek out physicians to amputate their legs, their arms, be blinded, sometimes ask to have their spinal cords severed. There is a psychiatrist who is herself transgender, Dr. Ann Lawrence, and in 2006 published a scholarly paper that drew the similarities between body integrity identity disorder and what was then called gender identity disorder, now called gender dysphoria. But what happens today when a child expresses, consistently and persistently insists that they are not their biological sex? You have a little boy who insists, "Mommy, Daddy, I'm a girl, I feel like a girl," breaks all the sex stereotypes. Now what medicine is recommending is that even whether the child's 3 or 17, that the child be affirmed in imitating the opposite sex, change the name, change the clothing, etc. This would happen until right before puberty. Typically close to puberty, these children will become anxious and depressed because they realize that their bodies are going to start developing the way they should, which is not how they feel. So for that reason, many physicians now recommend putting the child on Lupron, which will block the normal, natural puberty development. And what Lupron does in these children is that it prevents the surge of sex hormones. So let's say we're talking about a little boy. He is now prevented, his brain is prevented from triggering the release of testosterone. Testosterone in boys is key, not just for developing their bones and their voices and hair growth, but also brain development. Similarly, in the girls' case, it's estrogen that is suppressed. So we're not just arresting their secondary sex characteristics, we're arresting their brain development. And also in terms of what happens when they compare themselves with their friends or their peers. While these students are on puberty blockers and they remain small, basically looking like pre-pubertal, early pubertal children, their friends are growing and maturing. So that's when they are often introduced to cross-sex hormones. So you would have a little boy who has been put on Lupron. His testosterone has been blocked. His brain development is basically arrested along with his growth and so forth. But because he still feels like a little girl and wants to pursue this, and the doctors will now give him estrogen. And what the estrogen will do is that will help his body look more feminine, but it is not changing his chromosomes. The estrogen in turn is impacting his brain, his bones, and so forth. Surgeries are typically not introduced until, if it's a girl who wants to be a boy, if the girl has been on testosterone every day for 1 year, she may get a double mastectomy at age 16. Some parts of the country, this has happened as young as age 14. Genital surgeries are still not encouraged before 18. Is prepubertal social affirmation of gender dysphoria really risk-free? According to the APA, the American Psychological Handbook of Sexuality and Psychology, which was published in 2014, early social transition should be approached with caution to avoid foreclosing this stage of development. And I'll explain that a bit more in the next slide. Stress associated with possible reversal has been shown to be substantial. In other words, a three-year-old little boy, just by default, is encouraged, allowed to follow through his conviction that he is a girl, and so dressed like a girl, named as a girl. Over the years, if he changes his mind, let's say before age 9, before puberty blockers, there will be significant psychological stress for that little boy because he's developed a life as a little girl with friends and classmates and so forth. So that's what the handbook is warning about. Well, and that's how it could be harmful to kids with gender dysphoria. But what about kids without gender dysphoria? What about the children in the classroom who see Johnny come in as Johnny for 1 month, 1 year, and then the next time they see Johnny is Josie? And what about if they are exposed to, as they often are, drag queens reading them stories and about gender identity, picture books like Introducing Teddy, where Teddy is a male teddy bear at the start of the story with a bow tie, and then by the end of the story is a girl teddy bear. He's moved the bow up to his hair. That can, contrary to what many doctors claim, it can lead to derailing gender identity. It can lead to gender confusion. This is Dr. Lawrence Kohlberg. He found 3 stages of cognitive development relative to recognizing one's gender identity. It's true that by age 3, most kids can correctly identify whether or not they're a boy or girl. However, most children do not understand that a boy will grow into a man or a girl into a woman until age 4. Some children do not understand that sex is permanent until they're 7. There's variation, but in general, gender constancy, Dr. Kohlberg did find that there were some 7-year-olds who, if they saw Johnny sitting with them in slacks and a shirt, and Johnny goes out and comes back in a dress and makeup, there are some 5 to 7-year-olds who might think Johnny really did just become Josie. This does not mean that gender dysphoria or transgender identification is a choice, like what do I wear today? That is not what I'm saying. It's not a choice. These are genuine feelings and beliefs that come from within. But it's also not hardwired. It's a combination of nature and nurture. And even those experts in gender clinics will say it's possible in very young children that it may just be a phase. Very young children, ages 3 to 5, they have all kinds of magical thinking. You know, okay, I'm a lion tamer, I'm a firefighter. So the gender experts will admit, yeah, it could be a phase. What they use for criteria is if a child consistently, insistently persists in saying they're not their sex. Now, those of us on the other side say that's not good enough. Some children, I do know from my psychiatric and psychological colleagues who have treated gender identity disorder when it was called GID, there are sometimes children who feel they are not their sex because they have perceived it's unsafe. There are For example, girls growing up with an abusive father. They witness the father beating the mother, abusing her verbally, physically, emotionally. Some girls, let's say, again, it's part nature. In vulnerable children, some exposed to that situation may actually divorce themselves from their femininity and from their biological sex. It's not conscious. It's on the unconscious psychological level. If I'm a boy, I will be safe. The same can play out unconsciously or subconsciously if the child believes that their biological sex makes them unlovable. So trauma, abuse. Dr. Ken Zucker, who for nearly 4 decades was considered the world-renowned expert on childhood gender identity disorder, found that there were cases in which often it was the mother. He and his colleague, Dr. Susan Bradley, did find that in some cases there were mothers who unconsciously, subconsciously, desperately wanted a girl, but only had boys. And so, let's say the mothers had 2 boys. The second boy, and it was not conscious on the mother's part, but the mother would distance herself whenever that particular son would act rough and tumble in typical stereotypical boy fashion. If the son behaved in a more feminine manner, she would affirm him and show him love. This is all subconscious. It's not intentional. There's nothing evil about it. It's psychology. It does happen. Sometimes it's innocent circumstances. The one child I had, I practiced 15 years as a pediatrician here in Connecticut and Rhode Island, a couple of years in Virginia. The one case I had of a little 5-year-old boy, convinced he was a girl, it was simply, well, not simply, it took a while to come out in therapy, but in family therapy, he truly believed that his mom and dad didn't love him when he was a little boy because they had to shower so much attention on his younger sister with special needs. There's no one scenario that does it for every child. But there are definitely, and even if you believe that some may be born this way, you cannot deny that psychology absolutely is sufficient to explain it in many, many cases. And these are documented in the literature. On the slide I have social contagion, and ROGD stands for rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is unique to what's happening now in this age. And I'll explain more about that a little later. Transition affirmation is really what we've seen here increasingly since probably 2013. And what these graphs here show 2 different things. It shows that in between the early 2000s and the present, cases of children coming out as transgender have dramatically increased. And it also demonstrates that, what is rather unusual, girls are far outpacing the boys. So the girls are in red and the boys in blue. And this is being observed in clinics. This is the UK and Toronto and Amsterdam. In the US as well, but I didn't have charts for the US. And while some of that increase could certainly be because people are feeling more comfortable about coming out as transgender, that cannot explain all by itself the rapid increase. And one of the things, and again, it comes down to, well, what's more plausible? Is it more plausible that, well, these children were always transgender and always there, and now they're feeling safe? Or is it possible, more plausible, more possible, more likely, that we are seeing teenagers identify more frequently than they did in the past because it's essentially being marketed to them. Every teenager faces the challenge of identity formation. That's Erik Erikson. They either form their identity or enter into what's called role confusion. Every adolescent's job is to try on different identities. And when you're bombarded with, between the media, both social media, movies, etc., teaching in class that you could be trapped in the wrong body, this stands out as a way to find affirmation, to fit in. And what speaks to that is studies looking at this rapid increase and who makes up the teenagers now coming out. Girls were never overrepresented before. Now they are. And in addition to that, there is also associated significant psychopathology that's been untreated. Also overrepresented are girls with autism on the autism spectrum. And these things are not being taken into consideration before these children, these teenagers are being put on hormones or signed up for mastectomies. The rapid onset gender dysphoria is characterized by teenagers coming out as trans who had no previous symptoms of gender dysphoria whatsoever. As I said, girls, autism spectrum, psychopathology are overrepresented. Oftentimes, this may be announced after internet binges on Reddit or YouTube. There are many transgender sites encouraging teenagers who are struggling, whether it's with anxiety or depression, to see themselves as, you know what, you've always been transgender. If you just come out as transgender, all your problems will go away. We are the community for you. And sometimes it is that blatant. There's also a study, which is very interesting, that many students who come out, teenagers who come out as trans, describe a history of being called homophobic slurs. And this is interesting because it's also why I've been contacted by members, liberal members on the left, LGB folks as well. They are concerned because they truly believe that many of these girls who are coming out trans would have otherwise identified as lesbian. And when we look at the desistance rates, there is good reason to believe that. And we do have surveys in which teenagers have said it's easier to come out trans than it is to come out LGB. Now, anecdotally myself, I have gotten calls from many parents going through divorce. And this is across the country. I mean, probably 10 different states. In the past year, I've gotten calls from parents in 10 different states going through divorce, and it's been a daughter every single time, typically around age 15, who had no previous symptoms of gender dysphoria, now insisting that she's a boy, she wants to transition, she wants hormones, and one parent will be in favor of the hormones and the other parent isn't. And in each of these 10 cases, the parent who was in favor of the hormones was awarded custody, and the parent opposed to the hormones lost custody. It's not always, someone once asked me, well, is it always the dad who wants the hormones or no, it's only, and this is certainly, again, it's anecdotal, I only have 10 cases. But whether it's the mother or the father who were opposed to the hormones, more than once I've had them crying on the phone saying, I told her I love her, she can come out as lesbian, I just don't want her on the testosterone, I don't want her to cut off her breasts. These are not hateful parents. They love their children. They simply want them to wait until they are adults before they take actions that will have permanent consequences. So prior to the time when gender dysphoria was affirmed, and this is still found in the American Psychological Association's Handbook of Sexuality and Psychology, again, published in 2014.